The Florida housing market is going through a major correction, and it's not looking good in the short term. We've just gotten April numbers in, not just for Florida, but also nationally. So let's look at the national information first, just to kind of understand what the health of the housing market for the entire United States is. So for existing home sales, the median price as of April was actually up by 1.8% versus same time last year. So if anybody's saying that the housing market based on price is crashing, it's not crashed yet. I mean, the prices are still going up. But if we look at what's going on just trend-wise, that percentage change is actually declining. And there is a chance that we're going to be able to see some of it going into the negative. I personally don't think that the U.S. housing market is going to crash anytime soon, because based on a lot of data out there, there's still a shortage of supply versus the demand out there. But there's other factors that are currently playing into what we're seeing play out in the housing market. Homes are just staying on the market much longer, and there's also less transactions happening versus the same period last year. But each region in the United States is going to do somewhat differently. So for example, I know plenty of people that have come from, say, Connecticut or New Jersey, and they bought here in Florida, and I'm also seeing the data online. What they're experiencing there is much different than here in Florida, and it's partially because there's not as much new construction happening up north. There's a shortage of supply still, and demand is quite high. And homes, if they're listed really well and they show very nicely, can go pending very quickly within just a week's time maybe, with multiple offer situations still happening. Here in Florida, that's quite differently now. A lot has changed over the last few months. Let's look at the data for single family homes. I'm not going to talk about condos in general in this video here, because I've done plenty of condo related videos, and you know by now that the condo market is in crisis mode, especially for those that are 3 stories and higher and that are older. And it's driven by the Surfside bill, which is imposing massive demands on these older condo buildings 3 stories and higher in the form of inspections, and also making sure that the reserves are being built up in order to ensure that the type of repair work that needs to happen to a building is actually going to happen. Some of these buildings are being hit with massive assessments and also condo fees going up. And so there's a lot of negative publicity, PR, and a lot of buyers are shying away from purchasing these older buildings, especially those that are 3 stories and higher, or they're offering far less. And so we're seeing the prices drop in many different regions across Florida. Miami has been able to hold it, but we're starting to see those prices coming down as well when compared to the same time last year. But heading over to single family homes, most of you are going to be interested in single family homes here in Florida. So this is for you. What are we seeing in terms of data? So for Florida in general, we're starting to see the median price go down by -4%. Certainly not a crash, but we've really got to watch that trend line. That is starting to look really concerning. Also, when it comes to closed sales, that is down by -5%, almost 5%. As what we're seeing on a national basis, which is a slowdown, we're absolutely seeing that here in Florida. And it's not uncommon for homes to sit on the market for 100 days, 120 days, especially those that are just not priced really well, and those homes that don't show very nicely. But as I always say, we have to look at the information very much on a local level, because what is happening in Florida or even nationally isn't going to necessarily match what's happening on a local basis. And just to give you a point of comparison, so the Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach area has been one of the hottest markets here in Florida, very much driven also by international buyers. Right now, what we're starting to see is the median sales price percentage change versus same time last year. It's starting to go down. I wouldn't be surprised if we're starting to see that number actually go into the negative as well, especially in the short term. But how does that compare to, say, where I live? This is the Northport, Sarasota, Bradenton area. Mind you, that Northport, Sarasota, Bradenton are different cities, and they're going to be faring very differently. So the information here is lumped together, but still what we're seeing is concerning. The median sales price is down by double digits, -13% April versus same time last year. And that's actually a massive percentage change decline from just March. Some of it is going to be driven by the homes that are coastal, that have been selling off at much lower of a cost, part because maybe they were damaged, but also we're starting to see a buyer change. Many don't want to be coastal anymore. They don't want to be in an AE zone. They want to be further away. So we're seeing most of the massive declines very much on the coastal level, and that's really starting to drag that number down. But also what we're starting to see is that there are many sellers that are coming to the market because they're starting to realize now, oh my God, the market is changing. So if I want to cash out now, I better do it now. Typically, when it comes to timing the market, it's really hard to time the market, right? Not just in the housing market, but also in the stock market. And so when people realize that the market is changing, it might actually already be when it's heading downward. And so we're seeing a lot of listings on the market. You could be in an area, one street, where you may actually pass 3, 4, 5 listings. The sellers who are selling, they may be cashing out. They may be investors. Perhaps they're not getting as much rent as they would have liked to cover their increasing costs in homeowners insurance, but also in taxes. You know, some sellers are selling because they just don't feel safe living coastal, or perhaps they believe that the climate is just going to get worse from here on out. You may not believe in climate change, but plenty of people do, and that will have an effect on Florida housing market demand. So some of them are selling to move possibly further in. So we're starting to see a remigration happening within Florida to areas that are further away from the coast. And it might be as simple as just going from an AE zone to an X zone that's maybe just 2 or 3 miles away from the coast, but they're feeling safer. Or some of them may be leaving Florida altogether. Natural disasters can happen really anywhere, as we've seen last year and also this year with the fires over in California and tornadoes and winter storms. I mean, you're really not safe anywhere. The values of our properties are higher, and so with that, we're paying more tax money, especially on those properties that have not been homestead. They have not been capped at 3% increase on the assessed value of a home, estimated 3%. When it comes to homeowners insurance, that could have easily gone up quite a bit, right? Because we're all paying into the Florida homeowners insurance market. And so if we've had 2 bad storms last year, then of course also Tropical Storm Debbie, we're kind of all paying into it right now, and in many cases our homeowners insurance has gone up. But also when it comes to communication, there's just so much negative publicity out there when it comes to homeowners insurance costs that a lot of you buyers are thinking it's going to cost me $10,000, $15,000 to insure a single family home, which is not always true. And this is where much more accurate communication needs to come into play. I've had plenty of buyers that have bought, for example, new construction homes just recently, estimated $1 million. They're in X zone, a few miles in from the coast, and they're paying estimated $2,000, give or take, depending on their dwelling costs. This is where it's so important that you talk to a local insurance agent. Having said that, so that's kind of helping to increase the lower demand that we're seeing in the housing market right now. But also, and I think this is really important and not really talked about all that much, is that there are buyers on the sidelines because they're not sure of what's going to happen to the U.S. economy because of tariffs and, you know, all this conversation geopolitically happening here. And so they're just waiting to see how that's going to have an impact on the economy. And why do I believe this? Because I've talked to a lot of buyers, but also look at this article here. Trump tariffs could slow U.S. housing market in 2025. And so I believe in the short term in Florida, prices will go down. People aren't going into the market right now. They're just waiting things out to see what happens. What will happen in the long term? You know, a lot of it depends on what will happen to the economy here. There's been some recession talk here. We're not there yet, and hopefully we won't get there. But if we get into a recession, typically, and this is looking at historical data, the housing market does pretty well, for the exception of 2008. But the crash then was really driven by the mortgage industry collapse. With tariffs in play, a worst case scenario would be stagflation, a mix of stagnant economic growth and persistent inflation. In that case, even a recession might not prompt the Fed to cut rates. and instead they could be forced to raise the federal funds rate to combat inflation. And that could actually push the one-year Treasury yield higher, which in turn could drive mortgage rates up. And if mortgage rates stay elevated during a recession, that could be the one rare time where home prices actually decline in a recession. Geopolitical pressure will also have an effect on demand. The number one international buyer in Florida are Canadians. They're selling their properties here, and many are not coming right now to Florida. The Miami area in the short term, I believe, is going to feel some demand pain as well from the international buyers. In Miami, majority of international buyers are from South America, Mexico, some other places, and they may not be purchasing in the short term. So we're going to just have to watch these numbers. If anybody says that they know what's going to happen the next 9 months to a year, I don't think it's possible because there's too many moving parts. But what we are seeing just based on the trend line is that the prices are going down. I think if everything turns out economically speaking, some of these pain points are kind of out of the way from a geopolitical standpoint, tariffs, that kind of works itself out for the betterment of the United States. We're going to see some of that demand come back in. And we will see prices go back up again, not at the same appreciation rate as of the last few years. There's just so much that Florida has that none of the other states in the United States can really compete with. And that is going to be the continuous value proposition for Florida. And so you may ask yourself, okay, should I wait a few months? Should I purchase right now if I was interested in purchasing in Florida? Well, ultimately, you have to answer the question of, is now a good time for you to make a drastic move? Because there are too many forces out there that are impacting supply and demand, and it's making predictions so much harder. So ultimately, it really comes down to, are you ready? Does it make sense for where you're at in life? Thank you so much for watching today. Have a great day.